This meeting is being recorded.
Hi. So in session 1, let's talk about the qualifications of the Sofer. The Sofer needs to be qualified by being, first of all, a Jewish male above bar mitzvah. He has to be mentally competent, and he has to be a believer, which is a more subtle concept. It's hard to determine what that means, but he definitely at least has to believe in the mitzvah that he's doing, or Sefer Torah. He has to believe that the Torah is true. If he puts on tefillin, he has to accept the mitzvah of tefillin at the very least. If a person lacks any of those qualities, then anything that he wrote would be pasul. Not only is he not qualified to write, but he's not qualified to, let's say, separate letters that are touching. However, if such a person separated letters that were touching, of course, in the way that is allowed to be separated, which we'll discuss later, we didn't actually write the letters, but he adjusted the mezuzah or tefillin. So it would be kosher b'diavad. However, if we know where those places are, we should go and make the correction again ourselves, so as not to rely, as it were, on the correction of an unqualified sofer. You can't do that with the writing. The writing, you'd have to erase and redo it, so that's just redoing it. Okay, clear so far? You can hear me and see the text?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. If somebody, let's say you have a machlota, like let's say you have somebody who, I don't know, let's say you have like a closet of a certain size, and some poskim say you need a mezuzah and some poskim say you don't need a mezuzah. And this person doesn't have a mezuzah on that closet. But should he write a mezuzah for somebody who follows a different shita that you do need a mezuzah on that closet?
No,
or
whatever.
Let's say somebody doesn't put Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin on. Should he write Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin?
It's been asked and been answered both ways. So, you'll have to do your own shaila if and when it comes up. Okay. Okay. The sofer obviously has to know the halachas. The sofer obviously has to know the halachas. The only way to ascertain whether he knows the halachas is if he passes a test. And the only way to ascertain whether he passed the test is if he gets a piece of paper to show for it. So that's the same as saying that a sofer must have a diploma. But it's not the diploma that makes him a sofer, it's the knowledge of the halachas. Okay, the diploma just ascertains that. Since the writing itself has to be what's called derech ktiva, okay, it says uchtav tam, so the ktiva has to be normal. If I were to hold the kumas in my mouth and write, that wouldn't be normal writing, and therefore I wouldn't be fulfilling uchtav tam. Same thing if I'm writing and I were to write with my left hand, I wouldn't be fulfilling the mitzvah of uchtav tam, because it's not derech ktiva for me. And the same thing in reverse would apply to a lefty. A lefty must write with his left hand because that for him is derech ktiva. If he were to write with his right hand, it wouldn't be derech ktiva. What about a sofer who is ambidextrous? So if he's ambidextrous, he should write with his right hand, which is the norm of the majority. If he were to write with his left hand, there would still be kosher. That said, if a person would separate letters with his left hand, it would be the same thing as if a woman separated the letters. That means it would be kosher b'diavad, but lechatchila, if you know where he performed that separation, you have to go back and do it with your kosher hand. So it should be l'chatchila. It's important to have the proper kavana when writing stam. The proper kavana when writing stam is the kavana to fulfill that mitzvah. So if I'm writing tefillin, my kavana should be, this is in order to fulfill the mitzvah of tefillin. And I achieve that by saying the Shem Kedushat tefillin. The same with the Sefer Torah, the Shem Kedushat, the Sefer Torah, or the Shem Kedushat mezuzah. If a Sofer would not say that out loud, it would be puzzle according to most poskim. We'll get into the details of that, I think, in next lesson, probably. Okay. What about the klaf? The klaf that we write on, which is incorrectly translated as parchment. The correct term is vellum, although parchment works for most people because they expect to hear that word. So the klaf must be made from a kosher animal. The kashrut of the animal is the kashrut of the species, not of that specific animal. So, for example, if this was a nevela or a goy shechted a cow, so it's still kosher. No, it's not kosher to eat, but since the cow is a kosher animal, so it qualifies for the klaf. Another thing that the klaf has to be fully processed. It can't be rawhide. So, if the klaf is anything but halachically processed, then it's not kosher for writing. Now, what are the criteria for processing according to halacha? So, according to Rambam, it has to be thoroughly tanned in a mixture of salt, flour, well, not a mixture, a sequence of salting, drying it with flour, and then soaking it in walnut extract. Maliach, kamiach, ve'afitz. According to other Rishonim, it doesn't have to go through that specific sequence, but any sequence of chemicals or treatments that would render the skin fit for writing would make it kosher. That is why Rabbeinu Tam allowed processing the klaf with lime, not the fruit, the stone. When walnut extract became all but unobtainable in Europe, most Sfardim continued to use walnuts because they were under the rule of the Turkish Empire, where walnuts came from, so they didn't have that problem. But almost all of Europe transferred in the days of Rabbeinu Tam to processing in limestone, and that became the accepted minhag. There are people today that are machmir, like the Rambam, to use only walnut tanned skins, and I do so myself. Today there's no problem to get walnuts. Either way, it has to be processed thoroughly. Now, usually klaf is processed for at least a week in the solution before it's scraped and dried. But halachically, 4 days is the bare minimum. But as I said, there's no problem. They always leave it in for at least a week. So any klaf you would find today is thoroughly processed. However, since the processing is an essential part of koshering the klaf, it has to be done lishma. That means when whoever's processing these skins puts them all into the solution, he has to say B'Shem Kedushat Mezuzah if it's for mezuzahs, B'Shem Kedushat Sefer Torah if it's for Sefer Torah. What if he doesn't know what he's going to do with it? He wants to leave himself the option. After the skins are processed, he can sort them out according to his individual needs. So in that case, you make the highest level of Kedusha by saying L'Shem Kedushat Sefer Torah, which is definitely enough for Tefillin and Mezuzahs, which are a lower Kedusha. And to avoid the aspect of Ma'alim B'Kodesh Ve'ein Moridin, you don't take something down to a lower Kedusha, you're allowed to do that if you made a condition in advance. So what they do is they put the skins in the Shem Kedushat Sefer Torah on condition that I can always change it to Tefillin or Mezuzahs if I want. Since there are some minority opinions that making this conditional weakens the Lishma, so they would be machmir to make separate batches for the Torahs, Tefillin, and Mezuzahs. Also, people with that mindset would also be machmir not to rely on the mixing in the solution, because when they put the skins into the solution, it has to be mixed once a day because the chemicals tend to settle at the bottom. So they have to mix it up. Since it would be too heavy for an individual to mix such a large batch, they have a giant propeller, sort of like what goes inside a washing machine, that is moving by electrical power, but it is lowered by a lever into the solution by human power. According to almost all poskim, that is still Maaseh Gavra, the lowering. But since there are some that say, hey, wait a minute, the spinning is electric, so they say, no, you have to do it in smaller batches and mix it manually, which would go with making the smaller batches separate for Sefer Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzahs. The klaf that's processed that way, that's manually stirred, and almost always separated into batches according to the outcome, is called handmade klaf, because it's been mixed by hand. All the other processes of stretching, drying, scraping, sanding, they're all done exactly the same as the machine-made klaf. But klaf that's been stirred by hand has a certain following. Therefore, you will hear the expression handmade klaf. But don't get confused. It doesn't mean that it was made different. It just means that the mixing in the solution was done by hand. Everything else is exactly the same.
So people are
Since
machmir on
it is
this.
an obscure.
People are machmir on this, even though it was.
What?
People are machmir on this, even though it was initially placed.
Yeah.
It was placed in.
There are people that are machmir on this. There are people that are machmir on anything. Any chumrah they hear, they'll adapt.
I thought it was like is placing it into the sid is enough, right?
No, but they say, since if you don't mix it, the processing won't happen.
Because we have the whole issue if a goy can do all the other tasks rather than just the Jew putting it in, and the assistance in this whole discussion. I don't see a difference. Like why machine would be working.
They don't let the goy do the mixing, even in the so-called machine klaf.
Thanks.
Okay. So it is a minority chumrah. I could go on and on explaining why it's lumdously not an important chumrah. But most people don't listen and don't care about reasoning. They just hear, well, it's at more Mahura, so here's a few extra bucks by the more Mahura. But it's there's more important things to spend your money on. In the tefillin.
It's more mikubalish
But
than
that's
lumdish.
What?
It's probably more mikubalish than lumdish.
No, it has nothing to do with Kabbalah. Nothing to do with Kabbalah. Okay. And I'm just going to look at the text to see what the next concept is. Okay. Now, the skins, after they're processed, they still consist of two layers. Not layers of a cake you can see by looking at a cross section, but layers that can be separated and peeled apart. With great skill, though. Otherwise, it doesn't look. If you just look at a regular piece of leather, you won't see where it separates. But it does. And after it's separated, you have a sort of rougher, thicker layer, which is close to the body of the animal. And you have a thinner, smoother layer, which is on the outside of the animal, which the hair is attached to. Now, it is a machloket rishonim, which one is klaf and which one is dochsostos. But according to most shitas, and this is the way we follow nowadays, we consider the outside to be klaf and the inside to be dochsostos. Today, nobody uses the dochsostos the way they did in the time of the Gemara, so it is completely removed. And since we're not going to use it, they don't bother to peel it apart, which, as I said, requires great skill and comes with great responsibility. Wink, wink. Today, they just sand it off. Even more than sanding, it's sort of like a scraping, and it just turns into like sawdust and thrown away. It's not, or used for glue and stuff like that. But today, we write everything on the klaf. And klaf is written on the side that was attached to the dochsostos. If we want to use gvil, which is the whole layer, so we leave the dochsostos on, and we write on the outside. Now, those that have the minhag to write on gvil would be using gvil that way. However, there are some that are aware of the machloket in the Rishonim, which side is the klaf and which is the dochsostos, according to which all our tefillin and mezuzahs today would be puzzle, because they would be considered written on dochsostos, according to the Rishonim that hold that the klaf is on the inside. So what do they do about that? Well, it happens to be that not only a Sefer Torah, but also a mezuzah can be written on gvil. So, and which is what I did. Not because I'm such a big machmir, but it's nicer and it's also nice to be yotze. I mean, if it's right there, it's just as easy. So write mezuzahs on gvil. That way, you don't have to rely on one side of the argument, which side is dochsostos. And because all gvil is processed according to the Rambam, which is a more mainstream chumrah. With tefillin, which can't be written on gvil, has to be written on klaf, you have to choose. So today we choose the majority opinion that klaf is the outside. But you can still get klaf, Rambam klaf, but it means klaf that has been processed with gall nuts. And That way you can go to the Rambam, who was lechatchila anyway. The Kula of Rabbeinu Tam was only b'shat Chak because they had no gomats. So they transferred the process in the line. But it's always better to use Klaf that's processed with gomats. And it'll be easier and easier to get the more people ask for it, which is happening. Okay. The ink itself. There really is no chiyuv for the ink to be of any particular formula. But since, according to one of the Shiton Rishonim, it must be cooked. It's not just enough to mix. The ingredients, they have to be cooked. According to another Shita, it must come from plant-derived material. And according to other Shitas, it must include cancantum, which is copper sulfate. Basically, since there is a formula that works and that includes all shitas, basically all stam ink is made more or less the same way by about 10 different people, mostly in Eretz Yisrael, who make DO under different brand names. They're basically the same. Slight changes in the proportions of the ingredients or in the way they cook it or in the way they strain it and things like that could affect the quality of the ink, which is totally a matter of taste. Halachically, though, it could very well be that any black pigment, not dye, pigment, which is a color that has substance, any black pigment that does not include something treif would be kosher ink, which is what leads people who use a technical pen, otherwise known as a rapidograph, to make small corrections on stam to ascertain that the ink is kosher, which is commendable. However, technically, it's pretty much superfluous because there's no chance that there's anything treif in any of these chemical factories that make ink for pens. I mean, this isn't the Middle Ages where a guy, cooks his horse in the backyard and sells bottles of ink at the market. Okay, all these things are made at industrial zones where they buy the chemicals, by the numbers, E, 2, 3, 5. The chance of anything treif being in the ink is nil. Although, if you actually went and checked, you can get an actual picture, which is always nice. Okay, now the ink has to remain black for a long time. What's a long time? Okay, it's supposed to be. According to the Khatam Sofer, if after something like several decades, the ink becomes brown, that's okay because the ink does have some iron in it, and iron will oxidize over time. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the ink. However, if the ink turns brown after a few months, that's not oxidation, that's something wrong with the ink. So if the ink turned brown after a few months, it's puzzle. If it turned after many years, it's kosher according to the Khatam Sofer. And according to those who puzzle it, you can still fix it by writing over it. It would not be shalok. However, that is brown. If the ink is gray, that means that the ink did not contain enough pigment and had too much water in the proportions. And if it turned gray rather than brown, the ink was it puzzle? It's not the right word. Ink was no good, and therefore puzzle. Okay, and you cannot reinforce gray letters in terms of this. That would be sure. They do it in Sefer Torahs. But if your tefillin or mezuzahs became gray, then they have to be replaced. Okay, so far? Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Rabbi. Yes, Rabbi.
Don't raise your hand. I don't have a.
I do have one question about
Wait a
this.
second. Nobody
I do have one question about this part, which is, so am I correct in understanding?
Really hear me?
I'm sorry?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so please answer so I don't have to go out of the, because I have to leave the shared tab to ask that question. Okay, go on. What was your question?
My question is am I correct in understanding that if you have to fill in and one of the letters turns brown, you can rewrite over it?
If
And
it turned brown after a considerably long time.
yes. And then does it matter with regard to writing letters out of order?
Yes, if the brown was such that it's considered puzzle ink, not only would it be shaloka sidran, but you would have to scrape off the brown to be able to write over it.
But if the ink wasn't puzzle,
if the ink wasn't puzzle, that means it's still there. It's just not a nice color. So you're improving the color.
And it doesn't really count as completely rewriting the letter.
No, there's no gradation.
Okay.
If the letter is kosher, then you're allowed to write over it. If the letter isn't kosher, you can't write over it.
Okay. Thank you.
The letter still has its form.
Yeah. Okay.
Now
okay,
the Rishonim who say that the ink should be cooked. Is this just like a practical thing to thicken the dioi to make it like it's after all
it's
the
to make
ingredients are there, it's cooked?
Like there's instant coffee and there's cooked coffee and there's there's when you just mix something, it's called in I don't know in English the word is like an emulsified.
Thicken, yeah.
Yeah, emulsified isn't good, but it has to be cooked to where it's homogeneous. Okay. Because then it's not Dio is like it's a new situation. You have these components that were combined and became something new. If they're just mixed, it's just like it's like a fruit salad. It's not, each thing is still distinct. It didn't become a new reality.
Thanks.
Okay, the kumis. There is really no requirement to the kumis. The kumis can be made of absolutely anything. The only thing you cannot make a kumis from is if it's something that's isur hana. For example, if it was used for avodah zara, or if it was stolen, or if it's from a ira nidachat, or something like that, you can't use it. But you can use even a feather from a treif animal. Although there are some poskim that say no, you can't use it. No, they don't say you can't. They said maybe you can't. So they're not even sure. That said, don't use an eagle feather, even though it's probably kosher. Use a turkey feather like any normal person. However, you can use a plastic kumis, a metal kumis, a wood kumis, carbon fiber. They're making all kinds of new chromosomes are coming out, and it makes it easier for sulfuring. That said, nothing writes like a turkey feather. Nothing man-made so far. Maybe they'll develop something, but right now there is nothing that writes quite as well as a well-made turkey feather. A poorly made turkey feather is horrible, but so is a poorly made plastic feather, right? It's just that the plastic ones, they're all made by a machine exactly the same, so they're all the same quality. However, when you make a feather kulmus, it's kind of like baking challah. If you're really good at it, it'll come out very good most of the time. Every now and then, it'll flop, and then you'll have to make another one. Which is why more and more people give up, because they don't care that much about quality as much as they do about their time. The truth is that when you're good at making a kulmus, it really isn't a consideration of time, and it's just like 2-3 minutes. So, like for me, I have no reason to use anything other than the turkey feather. Even if I make a whole turkey feather and it flops, it takes me a minute to fix it. So it's not a consideration. The writing is so much more pleasant, as well as looking better when it's written with a turkey quill. But it does, again, have nothing to do with halacha. Okay? Those who would feel uncomfortable writing with an iron kulmus, barzel, is more kind of like a medrash kind of feeling, but it's not a halachic consideration. Okay?
Aren't there issues of different columnists in having? Isn't there an issue with the?
Halacha l'moshe is. Yes.
Isn't there an issue that some bring down
Yes.
about like a metal columnist that's being choikik into the cloth before the ksiva?
Nonsense.
You heard of such a thing? Nonsense. Mm-hmm.
People have said it, it's nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
They have no idea of the reality. Take a metal kulmus, spend a half a day trying to carve into the klaf, you won't.
Mm-hmm.
Try it. You would have to get it.
Yeah.
Not by writing.
Mm-hmm.
No, forget it. They don't know what they're talking about. Doesn't matter how long their beard is.
And they're probably just looking for reasons to say no. You know.
And stuff like that. Okay. Okay, so halacha l'moshe Sinai, but a mezuzah has to have etched lines, sirtut, for all the lines. A Sefer Torah, halacha l'moshe Sinai, has to have, at the very least, the top line. Tefillin do not need halachically sirtut at all. That said, it is so hard, it's virtually impossible to write straight lines without sirtut. Which is why all klaf comes with sirtut today. And even if you buy your klaf without sirtut, anybody, even writing tefillin, maybe even especially if you're writing tefillin because it's that much smaller, are going to use sirtut because it's just practical. That said, if you make an erasure that will remove part of the sirtut, then lechatchila, you have to put the sirtut back in mezuzah. In Sefer Torah, you don't have to, although people will. And when you do the sirtut, whether it's making the first sirtut at the factory or small sirtut where you erased, You have to do it lishma. Okay?
Wait, what does it mean
Now
not
the
to make
sirtut
not
cannot have any
lishma?
color, and you can't do it with a pencil or even a highlighter. It has to be done with something that would make an indentation in the klaf, which is done, with just like a metal awl. Okay, almost every Sofer has one somewhere in the drawers. By the time he needs it, he's not going to find it. I ended up over the years buying many and then finding them all at once, because by the time I need it, I can't find it. Okay, that's sirtut.
Can a woman do
What
sirtut?
else? In tefillin, definitely, because there's no chiyuv. In a Sefer Torah and a mezuzah, since it has to be halacha Moshe Sinai, it would be a machloket. It would depend whether, and this is already like an obscure lumdus. So basically, at the end of what I say, just remember no. Okay? Okay? Us being Orthodox and being recorded, anything that has to do with a woman, no. Okay? But academically, could be that it's okay, because it's not the same as the writing. The writing is uchtavtam. So the person has to actually do the action. The sirtut has to exist, but it doesn't have to necessarily be done. You understand what I'm saying? For example, I don't know, if I have
I saw
an
the.
animal
I think
that
it's
naturally
okay
has
for.
what?
I th- I
Yeah.
thought I was looking at it before. I like it's okay for the ibud, and that also has to be done lishma. So I was wondering if sirtut is like writing or sirtut is like ibud.
Right. So that's where the longest comes in. If it's like writing or no, if it's like writing in ibud, or if it's like the other malachas, which are not mentioned in halacha. It's a very subtle point. It's a kind of gavrach. It's a thing which, at the end of the day, everyone will say aser. So aser. But if you open your mind, you might be able to find a way of saying is you can't prove that it's aser, that it's pasuk. Forget what I said. It won't add anything to your lives. That sugya. Okay, if women start, demanding to be accepted into cloth factories as certain people, other people will deal with the question. Okay. 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 So that is a circle. Now, if you look here between the Hebrew and the English, there is a link. See this here? To a multiple choice questionnaire. I haven't translated that to English yet, but if you can deal with the Hebrew, or if you can, use AI to translate it or something like that, feel free to use that questionnaire to check your understanding and retaining of this class.